Imagine holding in your hand a coin that was born in the middle of the most devastating global conflict the world had ever seen. A coin struck not from the usual copper, but from steel coated with zinc. A coin that stands as both a necessity of war and a symbol of resilience. This is the story of the 1943 steel wheat penny, a coin so unique in American numismatic history that it continues to fascinate collectors, historians, and everyday people alike from the moment it left the presses of the United States Mint during World War II to the decades of discovery in pocket change. This coin has carried with it a tale of sacrifice, ingenuity, controversy, and survival. And today we will go deep into its history, its design, its circulation, its varieties, its errors, and its lasting impact on American coinage and culture. The wheat penny itself began in 1909 as part of President Theodore Roosevelt's campaign to beautify American coinage and honor Abraham Lincoln on the centennial of his birth. The new Lincoln cent featured the beloved wheat ears reverse, symbolizing prosperity and hard work. It became instantly popular and remained in production until 1958, when the memorial reverse replaced it. However, in 1943, the world and the mint faced an unprecedented challenge. Copper was needed for shell casings, for ammunition, for electrical wiring, for the vast machinery of war that kept Allied forces supplied on the battlefields of Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. The mint had no choice but to look for alternatives to continue cent production. Thus came the birth of the steel cent. In 1943, for the first and only time in American history, the 1-cent coin was made primarily of steel with a thin zinc coating to prevent rust. 3 main mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, struck these coins in the hundreds of millions, but despite their massive numbers, their appearance was so unlike the traditional penny that they immediately stood out in circulation. Bright silvery color often caused them to be mistaken for dimes, and their light weight made them feel unusual in the hand collectors. Today, see the 1943 steel wheat penny as one of the most iconic pieces of U.S. coinage, not just for its metallic composition, but also for the many varieties and errors that surround it. The most famous and valuable error is the 1943 copper penny, a mistake that occurred when leftover copper planchets from 1942 were fed into the presses. These rare survivors of a minting transition have fetched prices in the hundreds of thousands, even millions at auction, and continue to spark dreams among coin roll hunters and collectors around the world. But even the steel cents themselves have their own story of wear, corrosion, and survival, while the zinc coating protected the steel core. Initially, it often wore away, leaving the coins prone to rust and pitting, especially in humid environments. This made pristine examples harder to find and gave rise to the challenge of collecting steel pennies in high mint state grades. The differences between coins struck at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints provide additional variety for collectors, with each mint leaving its small identifying mark, or in the case of Philadelphia, none at all. Beyond the numismatic details, the steel penny reflects the sacrifices Americans made during World War II. It symbolizes how even the smallest denomination of money was tied to the larger war effort, and how everyday life adapted to extraordinary circumstances. Newspapers of the time reported on public reactions to the new pennies, some praising the patriotic move, others complaining about confusion at cash registers, banks, and stores. The mint itself issued statements reassuring the public that the change was temporary, and indeed, in 1944, copper returned, but not pure copper. This time, the coins were made from salvaged shell casings, a poetic reminder of how money and war became linked. In the most literal sense, over the decades, the 1943 steel wheat penny has grown in legend. Stories of children in the 1950s searching through piles of change in hopes of spotting the shiny steel cents, stories of families keeping jars of them as curiosities, stories of collectors chasing after the elusive copper version as the holy grail of American cents. Television shows, magazines, and coin dealers all helped spread the fame of this coin, turning it into an icon in American numismatics. In the world of grading and value, The steel wheat penny presents many dimensions. A common circulated example may only be worth a few cents, but higher-grade uncirculated specimens, especially those with brilliant original luster, can command significant premiums. Mint State 65 or better coins, particularly those certified by professional grading services, can bring collectors hundreds of dollars. And when it comes to error, coins off-center strikes, doubled, dies wrong, planche errors, and of course, the legendary copper strikes, the prices soar into the stratosphere. As we dive deeper into the history of this coin, we uncover the metallurgical decisions, the political discussions, and the wartime directives that gave birth to the 1943 steel cent. We explore the day-to-day experiences of Americans encountering the new coins. We trace their journey through circulation storage hoards and the modern collector market. We look at the technological challenges of producing steel planches, at scale the methods of plating them with zinc, and the problems encountered when the coating wore down. We also consider the long-term influence this coin had on future minting experiments and the ongoing fascination with alternative metals. The story of the 1943 steel wheat penny is not merely about a piece of currency. It is about America itself in a time of sacrifice, innovation, and unity. It is about the intersection of war and money, industry and necessity, patriotism and daily life. It is about how a small coin in your pocket can tell a story that stretches across continents and generations. And by the end of this journey, you will see that this humble penny is not just a coin. It is a chapter of history frozen in steel. The year was 1945, a year that carried the weight of both victory and devastation, a year that marked the closing chapter of the Second World War and the beginning of a new global order. And yet, in the middle of this monumental year of history, the United States Mint quietly produced a coin that would become a piece of everyday life and also a marker of that era's spirit. The 1945 Lincoln wheat cent. This humble 1-cent piece, minted in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, was struck at a time when the United States stood at a crossroads between wartime sacrifice and peacetime rebuilding, and in every way the 1945 wheat penny tells a story of America's resilience, its economy, its culture, and its people. The obverse of the coin continued to feature the enduring profile of Abraham Lincoln, a design first introduced in 1909 by Victor David Brenner, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, and by 1945, this portrait was more than just a likeness. It had become a national symbol, one that Americans looked upon daily in their pockets as they endured. Rationing, worked in factories, supported soldiers overseas, and prepared for life after the war. On the reverse, 2 simple wheat stalks framed the words, 1 cent United States of America, flanked by E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one. This design represented both simplicity and strength during an age when every ounce of copper, every moment of labor, and every resource had to be carefully allocated to support the war effort. But by 1945, something important had changed for the wheat cent for 3 years. From 1942 to 1944, the Mint had experimented with alternative metals for the penny because copper was needed for ammunition shell casings and other wartime materials. In 1943, the famous steel penny was struck, a coin with a zinc-coated steel core that looked silvery and unusual compared to the traditional bronze cent. By 1944, however, the Mint returned to a primarily copper-based composition, using recycled shell casings from military stockpiles, and so the 1945 wheat penny belongs to that period of wartime and post-wartime metallurgy. It is composed of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, though in reality, most 1945 cents were closer to being 95% copper and 5% zinc. Because tin supplies were extremely limited, this detail matters because collectors today can trace how the war not only changed the appearance of coins, but also their physical makeup. And when you hold a 1945 wheat cent, you are holding a coin whose copper may have once been a shell casing used on the battlefield, reminding us that even the smallest coin carried within it the echoes of global conflict, the mintage figures of the 1945. Penny also tell us a great deal about the time in Philadelphia. The main mint produced more than 1 billion of these coins, an enormous number that reflected both the booming American economy at the end of the war and the need for circulating currency. As millions of soldiers returned home and re-entered civilian life in Denver, the mint struck over 266 million coins, and in San Francisco more than 181 million. All told, the 1945 wheat cent is one of the most common wheat pennies of the era, yet despite its abundance, the coin is cherished by collectors not simply because of rarity, but because of context. It stands as a snapshot of a single pivotal year. The year the war ended, the year the atomic age began, the year millions around the world breathed both relief and uncertainty. It is a coin that connects pocket change to world history. When we examine the Philadelphia issue, we find that the absence of a mint mark on the coin does not diminish its historical value. It is the sheer volume of Philadelphia's production that shows us the industrial might of the United States. During that period, the Denver issue carries the familiar D beneath the date, reminding us of the Rocky Mountain Mint that had become a powerhouse of wartime coinage production, while the San Francisco S marked coins tie us to the West Coast and to a mint facility that had been crucial not just in making coins, but in supplying the Pacific theater economy with currency. If we step back and consider the artistic side of the 1945 wheat cent, we see Victor David Brenner's design still crisp, still emblematic of early 20th century ideals. Brenner's Lincoln was not just a portrait, but a statement about democracy, integrity, and leadership. His initials VDB had caused controversy in 1909 when they were first placed on the reverse and later removed. But by 1945, collectors and the public alike had accepted his artistry as one of the most enduring in American numismatics. What makes the 1945 wheat penny even more fascinating is the way it circulated through everyday American life. Pennies like these paid for newspapers in the morning. They bought candy and soda for children. They dropped into jukeboxes at the local diner. They were stacked into rolls at banks across the nation. They found their way into church collection plates and soldiers' pockets, and for many families of the 1940s, these coins were a constant companion in a time of both hardship and hope. As the war ended in Europe in May of 1945, and in the Pacific in August of that year, coins like the 1945 wheat penny were spent in celebration, in mourning, and in rebuilding the everyday rhythm of life. The collector of today sees not just a common bronze coin, but an artifact of that time frame. Collectors also study the variations in strike quality between the mints. Philadelphia coins often display sharper details because of the higher mintages and fresher dyes. Denver and San Francisco issues sometimes show weaker strikes or differences in luster, but these small variations become significant in the hands of a numismatist who seeks to connect every detail of the coin to the history of its making errors. To play a role in the story of the 1945 wheat penny like doubled die, obverses, repunched mint marks, and off-center strikes, which can elevate an ordinary cent to a prized rarity within a collection. And here again the history deepens. For these errors were not merely accidents. They were the natural byproducts of a mint working at maximum capacity during an age of industrial strain, when the demands of production sometimes outpaced perfection. When you expand the lens further, you see that the 1945 wheat penny sits at the end of an era, because in just a few years, by 1959, the reverse design would change from the wheat ears to the Lincoln Memorial, reflecting a shift in both style and national identity. So this coin is part of the last great generation of wheat cents, which today are treasured for their link to a different America. To tell the story of the 1945 wheat penny is to tell the story of a nation at a turning point. And that is why collectors, historians, and everyday enthusiasts alike continue to search for these coins in circulation in estate sales and in old family jars. They are reminders that history is not only written in textbooks or in monuments, but in the smallest everyday objects, objects that passed from hand to hand silently, recording the triumphs and tragedies of their time. The 1945 wheat penny is therefore more than a cent, more than copper, more than a design. It is a bridge between the hardships of war and the promise of peace, between the sacrifices of the greatest generation and the aspirations of those who came after it. Is a story you can hold between your fingers, a story of America at its most determined, most tested, and most triumphant. Imagine holding in your hand a small copper coin minted in 1953, a wheat penny, whose face value was just 1 cent, but whose story stretches across generations of American history, economic change, artistry in coin design, and the subtle mysteries of numismatics. This is not just a penny. It is a window into the post-war era, a time when America was finding its footing after World War II, when prosperity was rising, but also when global tensions of the Cold War were beginning to shape the world. The wheat penny of 1953 tells us about how coins were made, the metal they were struck from the mints that produced them, the artistry of Victor David Brenner, who first designed the Lincoln cent in 1909, and the enduring symbolism of wheat, ears that represented American agriculture strength and growth. In those years, every coin in circulation carried a message far greater than its face value. The story of the 1953 wheat penny begins with its design. On the obverse, we find Abraham Lincoln, the beloved 16th president immortalized on the cent since 1909. The Lincoln cent was the first U.S. coin to bear the portrait of an actual person, breaking away from the classical allegories of liberty that had dominated coinage for over a century. Brenner's design placed Lincoln facing right with the word liberty to his left and the date to his right above him, the motto, "In God We Trust," which had been appearing on coins since the Civil War era. What makes this coin iconic is the reverse, with its 2 simple wheat stalks, one on each side, framing the words 1 cent and United States of America, along with the motto, E pluribus unum. This wheat design would last until 1958 before being replaced in 1959 by the Lincoln Memorial reverse. But beyond the design lies the real depth of history. The 1953 wheat penny was minted at 3 locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Each mint left its own small mark of history. Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark. Denver pennies bore a D, and San Francisco pennies and S. Collectors today seek out these varieties not only for their differences, but for their relative rarity. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 256 million coins. Denver struck more than 700 million, while San Francisco produced a more modest 181 million. In total, over 1 billion wheat pennies were struck in 1953, which speaks to the incredible demand for small change in post-war America. The metal content of these coins is another layer of their story, struck in 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. These coins carry within them the last full era of copper cents, before the dramatic changes of the 1970s and 1980s, when rising metal costs would lead to pennies being made primarily of zinc. The feel, weight, and tone of a 1953 cent speaks to an earlier age, when coins carried substance, when every clink in the pocket resonated with real metal. The historical backdrop of 1953 adds even greater meaning. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. The Korean War had just ended, the Cold War was heating up, and the American economy was booming. Suburban expansion, consumer spending, and industrial growth were reshaping the nation. Coins were everywhere: vending machines, buses, corner stores, pay telephones. All required pennies, nickels, and dimes. In those years, the penny still mattered. It could buy a stick of gum, a piece of candy, or contribute to a gallon of gasoline, costing just 29 cents. When we study a 1953 wheat penny, we are not only studying metal, but also the daily life of millions of Americans. For collectors, the value of the 1953 wheat penny varies dramatically depending on its condition. While most circulated examples are worth only a few cents to perhaps $1, pristine examples, uncirculated with full red luster, can fetch far more. especially those certified by grading services like PCGS or NGC. And then there are errors and varieties which make certain 1953 cents worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars doubled dies. Repunched mint marks off center strikes or coins struck on the wrong planchets. All are treasures waiting to be discovered in rolls jars or family coin boxes. The artistry of the wheat penny design also invites deep reflection. The choice of wheat. Ears as the central motif was not accidental in 1909. When Brenner created the design, the United States was still a largely agricultural nation. Wheat represented prosperity, nourishment, and growth. It was a symbol the average citizen could connect with. By 1953, though the country was shifting toward industrialization and urban living, yet the coin still carried that agricultural legacy, as if to remind Americans of their roots. As we dig deeper, we can look at the transition that followed just a few years later in 1959, when the wheat reverse gave way to the Lincoln Memorial. This marked the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth and signaled a new direction in coin design. The 1953 wheat penny thus sits near the end of an era representing the last chapter of the beloved wheat design. Collectors cherish these coins not only for their copper glow but for their place as one of the final wheat issues. Even more fascinating is how these coins circulated. They traveled in the pockets of soldiers returning from Korea, factory workers, suburban families, children saving coins in piggy banks. They were exchanged in diners, jukeboxes, laundromats, and corner stores. Every scratch and mark on a circulated 1953 penny tells a story of everyday American life. To truly appreciate the 1953 wheat penny, we must also consider the broader numismatic tradition. The Lincoln cent has been in continuous production for over a century, making it the longest-running coin design in U.S. history. When you hold a 1953 cent, you are touching part of that legacy, part of a series that has endured longer than any other in American coinage history. This little coin connects us to art, politics, economics, and the ordinary lives of people decades ago. It teaches us how to see coins not just as money, but as historical documents, tiny works of art and enduring artifacts of culture for the collector, for the historian, for the curious soul. The 1953 wheat penny is a treasure not for its rarity alone, but for the story it carries from the heart of mid-century America.